This QADAO presentation follows on from a brief summary and overview that covered the Voltaire CIP-1694 background, what is a QADAO improvement proposal, high-level points from the specification and motivation. Here, we move on to a more detailed review of the CIP-1694 specification. The specification. Current CIP-1694 specification draft, as of February 2023, is divided into the following four main sections: Constitution and the Constitutional Committee, which gives an overview of the combined governance group and its remit; governance actions, which detail the different types of on-chain events that are governance actions; votes, which provide details of vote transactions, the life cycle of on-chain governance states, and epoch boundaries; and finally, Delegated representatives, or DReps, provides detail on DRep registration and retirement certificates and a vote delegation certificate, a new stake distribution for DReps, and changes to the existing ledger rules. Constitution and the Constitution Committee form the heart of the on-chain decentralized governance mechanism. The scope of the Constitution that will inform and guide the Constitutional Committee is kept vague. The Constitution is only referred to as an informational document that unambiguously captures the QADAO core values. An appendix to CIP-1694 judges the contents and processes that amend the Constitution as very important. However, the authors believe these processes are sufficiently separate from the protocol described in 1694 to merit a separate and focused discussion. Elsewhere, an intent to seek out QADAO community values has been expressed. A default would be that the Constitution is decided by the Constitutional Committee, but this is not specified. The intent is to store the text of the Constitution off-chain with only a hash digest value or summary of information to be recorded on-chain. Much more detail is provided on the Constitutional Committee. The Constitutional Committee represents a set of individuals or entities authenticated by cryptographic signature, responsible for overseeing governance actions and ensuring that the Constitution is respected. The first or initial Constitutional Committee is likely to be composed of founding entities, IOG, and the QADAO Foundation, together with key community actors who are interested in participating in the QADAO governance process. The extent of share of participation from the founded entities and how community actors are defined as key and selected is not specified. Constitutional Committee states. The Constitutional Committee has two possible states: one, a normal state, i.e. of competence, and two, a state of no competence. The state of no competence is a kind of fail-safe that prevents the current committee from participating in any governance actions. This state voids any outstanding governance actions and requires a committee replacement to continue the work of governance. The Constitutional Committee will use a hot and cold key setup. A hot key is connected to the blockchain and is live. Cold key is offline and requires manual intervention to initiate. The draft specification states the intention to reuse QADAO's existing Genesis delegation certificate mechanism that was introduced at the start of the Shelley era. Replacement of the Constitutional Committee. The Constitutional Committee can be replaced either for a specific governance action when in a normal state, i.e. a state of competence. This requires the approval of the current Constitutional Committee and the DReps, or with a state of no competence via a specific governance action that requires the approval of the SPOs and the DReps. Size of the Constitutional Committee. The size of the Constitutional Committee and its quorum, the number of votes that are required to enact governance actions, is not fixed and can be varied whenever a new committee is installed. In this context, a quorum is a minimum number of votes required to enact governance actions. In general, having a quorum helps to ensure that decisions are made with the participation of a representative group of participants, rather than just a small minority. A similar consideration applies to the size of the Constitutional Committee. Changes to the committee size and quorum parameters are enacted by a governance action. This action requires a minimum level of voting stake that will be explained later in this presentation. Governance actions. A governance action is a blockchain parameter on-chain event triggered by a time-limited transaction. It has a deadline after which it cannot be enacted. An action is ratified once it has gathered enough votes to support it. If it fails to gather sufficient yes votes before its deadline, the action expires, or any action may be dropped subsequent to a motion of no confidence. Once ratified, an action is said to be enacted. Types of governance actions. The range of governance actions are as follows. 1. A motion of no confidence, a motion to create a state of no confidence in the current Constitutional Committee. 2. New Constitutional Committee and/or quorum size, changes to the members of the Constitutional Committee and/or its signature threshold. 3. Updates to the Constitution, a modification to the off-chain Constitution recorded as an on-chain hash of the text document. 4. Hard fork initiation triggers a non-backwards compatible upgrade of the network and requires a prior software upgrade. 5. Protocol parameter changes, changes to one or more updatable protocol parameters, excluding changes to hard forks. 6. Treasury withdrawals, movements from the Treasury subcategorized into small, medium, or large withdrawals. Who can submit a governance action? Any ADA holder can submit a governance action to the chain. A deposit of Lovelace is required, which will be returned once the action is finalized, whether it is ratified, has been dropped, or has expired. The motion of no confidence action is an extreme measure that enables ADA holders to revoke power granted to the current Constitutional Committee. If this motion is enacted, any outstanding governance actions, including ones that the committee has ratified, will be dropped. In the case of other governance actions, voting takes place, followed by ratification or expiry. Voting. A vote takes the form of a transaction on the QADAO blockchain. Each vote transaction consists of 1. A governance action ID, which identifies the governance action. 2. A role, or Constitutional Committee, DRep, or SPO. 3. A key hash, which will verify the role taken. 4. A URL, which points to any metadata that is relevant to the vote. 5. A hash of the contents of the URL. And finally, 6. A yes or no or abstain vote. Abstain in this context is a type of on-chain vote. Voting mechanism. 1. A key hash will trigger the appropriate signature check on the transaction. 2. Votes can be cast multiple times for each action with a single key hash. 3. Submitted votes override any older votes for the same key hash and role. 4. As soon as the governance action is ratified, voting ends. 5. No further votes are considered or recorded. The governance state. When a governance action is successfully submitted on-chain, its progress will be tracked by the ledger state. In particular, the following will be tracked: the governance action ID, the epoch in which the action expires, the deposit amount, the rewards address that will receive the deposit when it is returned, the total yes, no, abstain votes of the Constitutional Committee, the DReps, and the SPOs for this action. An epoch on the QADAO ledger is a time division that regulates the production of blocks as part of a transaction validation process. Stale votes. Votes, a vote transaction, from DReps and SPOs may become meaningless as the epoch expiry date is crossed. Therefore, all unregistered votes are cancelled before any new votes are considered. Changes to the stake snapshot. The stake snapshot changes at each epoch boundary. Therefore, a new current voting tally must be calculated for each governance action based on the votes that have been cast before any new votes are counted. This avoids the same mistake being used 2 or more times. Given the status of the governance state, this new tally may result in immediate ratification of a governance action. Delegated representatives, DReps. Voltaire DReps are not Project Catalyst DReps. The ability for an ASA holder to delegate their stake to DReps will be introduced. DRep voting certificates. DRep registration will emulate the existing stake delegation mechanisms for a new set of voting certificates. These will comprise a DRep registration certificate, a DRep retirement certificate, and a vote delegation certificate. The DRep registration retirement certificates administer their on-chain identification, information, and status. New stake distribution for DReps. A new stake distribution for DReps will determine what ADA Lovelace transactions are active for voting, whether DReps have a sufficient active voting stake, and whether a vote threshold has been met. DRep incentive options. If DReps are to be compensated for their work, corresponding incentive mechanisms will need to be specified, with funds coming from the per epoch treasury allocation. Performance constraints will also need to be considered to moderate the number of DReps voting on each governance action. Some options to ensure a manageable number of DReps include requiring a large deposit when registering oneself as a DRep, an incentive scheme similar to the stake pool reward scheme used to limit individual rewards, some form of a per epoch randomized subcommittee of DReps which takes stake weight into account. New parameter changes. New protocol parameters will be needed for the following: governance action deposit amount, governance action expiration as a number of epochs from the current epoch, thresholds for treasury withdrawals, each of the ratification thresholds. This presentation was produced by QADAO, which is a community organization that provides the following services: governance and community support, auditing and oversight, documentation and communication, facilitation and co-production, project management and automation. You can support our work by delegating to our Cardano stake pool, QADAO, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Twitter for the latest announcements. To take part in the conversation on the Voltaire CIP-1694, visit the Cardano Foundation Forum's governance section. This presentation is also documented in QADAO's Ekphrasis GitBook. Further links are provided below for further reference. Thank you.